Welcome back, everyone. My name is Alex Wiseman. This is the third in a series of 3 screencasts looking at theory testing and building. We spent some time in the first screencast talking about what is theory and what are some of the benefits, limitations, and elements. In the second screencast, we talked about theory testing, how to do it, and what the degrees of theory testing might be if we were to look at published work that was testing theory. And in this screencast, we're going to talk about theory building, which is essentially what is it, how do we build theory, and then how do we identify theory building in work when we're reading it. I would like to emphasize, as I've done every time, that I'm taking the information directly from these two fine references, Colquitt and Zapata-Felon and Bhattacharjee online textbook. Please do reference them if you're interested in finding out more. And as always, everything that good comes out of the screencast belongs to them. Anything that you find a fault with, please attribute it to me. It's my own particular spin on things. So I'm going to zoom past everything that we've covered so far right to the theory building section. And let's talk about what theory building is. So we said, while we do that, actually, let's start with theory testing is the process of testing whether a certain theory of your choosing is a plausible explanation of a phenomenon that you would like to investigate. Now, in contrast, theory building requires the synthesis of a broad range of literature and studies to provide evidence or confirm explanations to a given phenomenon. All right, so theory building is going to require some sort of synthesis of literature, research, evidence, etc. that will provide or confirm explanations for any given phenomenon. Theory building is an attempt to plausibly explain something in a different light or a different perspective than has previously been suggested. Right? The point of building a theory is that you're suggesting that existing theories cannot or do not adequately explain whatever phenomenon it is that you want to explain. Now that requires an awareness of what the plausible theories explaining that phenomenon currently are and how they're used in empirical research. You can't just say, I'm going to build a theory because nobody's done this before if you don't know for a fact that nobody's done this before. So you must understand all or most of the main theories that attempt to explain a particular phenomenon before you can build a theory to differently explain that phenomenon. Now this will be slightly different if we're talking about ideographic versus nomothetic or micro versus macro theoretical explanations. In a micro or ideographic theory, you're going to find they're much more focused on specific situations, and so it's going to be more difficult to find a theory that can be generalized across those specific situations. With nomothetic or more macro scope theories, you will find it much easier to find a theory that can explain a phenomenon across contexts or situations or whatever. So there are some caveats to this, but do remember that you have to know what you're trying to explain and what other people have said about it before you can build a theory of your own. So how do you build a theory? Well, there are a couple of ways that I'm going to suggest based on the works that I referenced earlier just a few minutes ago. Probably the most well-known approach from a qualitative standpoint is grounded theory building. And I am not going to go into a whole lot of depth on, quite frankly, any of these steps on how to build a theory, but particularly not on grounded theory, because grounded theory has a whole community of researchers and a whole literature that's built up around it. If you want to know more about grounded theory, trust me, Google and look in the library and you will find more information than you can get. But the long and the short of it is that grounded theory builds theories inductively based on observed patterns of events or behaviors. Right? Builds theories inductively based on observed patterns of events or behaviors. Now, observing patterns of events will not necessarily make a theory unless the researcher is able to provide consistent explanations for the observed patterns. But you're not deducting this, you're inductively observing and then making some decisions about what the explanations for a particular phenomenon are based on those patterns of events or behaviors. So again, you'll see a lot of that in the literature. You can find more about grounded theory very easily. Another way to build a theory is through bottom-up conceptual analysis. And this obviously builds theories by conducting a bottom-up conceptual analysis that identifies different sets of predictors relevant to phenomenon of interest using a predefined framework. I'm just going to underline a couple of things here. Bottom-up conceptual analysis, sets of predictors using a predefined framework. In this case, you have a framework that can be as simple as an input, process, output framework, where you're looking for different categories of inputs that are related to different categories of outputs, and then describing the processes that link those two, right? So you have some sort of a model or a framework that you're using to begin with, but you're trying to figure out how it's connected, how the input and output are connected to one another through a particular process. And you're doing this bottom up because you're not taking it this sort of macro conceptual approach as much as you are looking at what the inputs and outputs are and then describing those processes that link them together. A third way to build a theory is to extend or modify existing theories. This is actually a very popular one that I don't think is mentioned enough, and quite frankly, I think it's an appropriate way to go. You can build theory by extending or modifying existing theories, usually to explain a phenomenon in a new context. This is a deductive approach, whereas the first two were inductive. This is a deductive approach where certain concepts, propositions, or boundary conditions of the old theory are often retained while others are modified to fit the new context. So for example, if I'm using a theory that talks about legitimacy seeking, there might be certain ways that legitimacy seeking was defined in my theory, but in a different context, legitimacy would mean something much different. And so we'd have to redefine what that concept is and then how it related to other concepts within that theoretical framework for the new context. So legitimacy in a sort of a modern capitalist context could have something to do with the amount of financial resources or the financial power that a particular individual or organization, whoever the agent was, has. But if we're talking in a different context, like maybe we're thinking about a context of well, we'll just make it really different. We're looking at ants. We're now studying the social behavior of ants. They wouldn't have financial resources the same way that people would. And so we could modify our old legitimacy-seeking argument to fit the ant community. I know I've gone a little off the wall here. To fit the ant community, but we just take that legitimacy idea and we'd redefine it. What does it mean to be a legitimate part of an ant colony? I don't have the answer to that. It was a silly example, but you get where I'm going. New context, change the way that we think about the concepts, propositions, or boundary conditions. We can also apply existing theories in a new context. So this is a way to literally pick up a theory and then place it into an entirely new context by drawing upon the structural similarities between those two contexts. It's also a deductive approach. It relies a lot on reasoning by analogy. An easy example for this is there's a host of organizational theories that are used specifically for the health profession and hospitals that are also often used for the education context in schools. And the reason being is that there are some structural similarities between those two contexts. Both of them are highly complex bureaucratic institutions, medicine and education. But the actual organizations within those institutions, the hospitals and the schools, are also interesting in that they have a population that is largely made up of the public, the population that's served. It's a population that they don't necessarily choose. In other words, not all hospitals and schools can select who becomes a patient or who becomes a student. They're also highly publicly permeable. In other words, people who participate in these institutions or in these organizations have the ability to influence how they are treated if they're in a hospital or how they're taught if they're in a school. So there's a lot of public permeation into each of these different hospitals or schools as organizations. So we could take some of the same theories that were used for medicine and for thinking about hospitals and apply those existing theories into this entirely new context, that would be the education or school context, because there are some structural similarities between the two. So we have 4 ways to build a theory. Grounded theory, which is inductively based on observed patterns of events or behaviors. We have a bottom-up conceptual analysis, which relies on a predefined framework and then simply identifying a set of predictors that will help explain how inputs and outputs are related to one another. You can extend or modify existing theories, specifically when there is a phenomenon that is occurring in a new context, although it might be the same phenomenon as previously. And then we can apply existing theories in a new context if we draw upon the structural similarities between the two contexts. All right, so 2 inductive and 2 deductive approaches to building a new theory. Now, if we're looking at the existing literature, and we're looking back at the Colquitt and Zapata-Phelan article, we have this taxonomy of theoretical contributions. On the y-axis, we have building new theory and the different degrees. So if we're looking at existing literature, how might we estimate the degree to which that research that we're reading is building theory? At the lowest level, it would attempt to replicate previously demonstrated effects. All right? So it would be research that was replicating what had come before. This probably means that they were replicating some of the theoretical framework or theoretical explanations as well. At the second level, it would be examining effects that have been the subject of prior theorizing. So trying to figure out if the effects that others had theorized meant certain things still meant that. A third degree would be introducing a new mediator or moderator of an existing relationship or process. So taking a phenomenon and then adding in something new in order to see if that changed the output or changed the way that the whole phenomenon operated. At the next stage, you can examine a previously unexplored relationship or process. That would be certainly a new way of doing it, but we'd want to make sure that you're building theory either inductively or deductively as a part of that. And then finally, introducing a new construct or a significantly reconceptualized one as a way to see, again, much like introducing a new mediator or moderator, in order to see if that significantly changed or altered the phenomenon and altered the way that we would explain it or understand it. So we have 4 ways of building theory, and we have 5 ways of talking about the degree to which research builds theory. I want us to recognize that theory building and theory testing shouldn't be at polar opposite ends of the theory spectrum. And in fact, if we look again at this figure that's in the corner of the slide, we'll see that really it's the combination of theory testing and theory building that leads to theory expansion, which is the interesting part, growing theory, thinking about ways that we can understand what's going on better and in different directions or new ways. So it is a symbiotic process of theory testing and theory building. We will never find a theory that fits every context or every situation perfectly. So testing theory will always bring us, in every theory's case, to find faults or flaws, even though it might be a strong fit for certain phenomena. So there's always going to be room for certain types of theory building as well. So these two definitely are connected. So we've spent the last 45 minutes, if you've watched all 3 of these screencasts, going over what is theory, how do we test theory, and then how do we build theory. These have been obviously quick introductions to each of these areas. I would encourage you to think about the kinds of theories that you're currently being exposed to and the ways that you can test them and the ways that you can build them as you move forward.